Kara, thank you very much. Very, very good. All right, I'm supposed to say junior high, senior high. They took off early. I didn't know that was going to happen. I figured it out while I was sitting here. I was trying to figure out, why did they leave early? Because the last 3 weeks, Josh has got out later than we did. So I think he's getting a head start. So some of you parents and grandparents said, get those kids out here. So he got a head start, I guess. But today I want to continue on in our series about leadership and identifying various traits of leadership. Today I'm going to talk about John the Baptist. Again, I want you to consider with me, we always get hung up on the term talents. Well, you've got this talent or that talent. I want you to think about traits, not talents. What is a trait in your life that you have? Something that you've developed, something that's part of it. You know, today there are many people without hope. What a terrible week as we think about the shooting in Chattanooga and all that has gone on. It's been a terrible week. I told you before, I'm sick of the hate, sick of the type of situation that we're seeing, and most of you are as well. And it was disheartening to see all of that transpire. See, we live in a world that is without hope. And because of that, we see a lot of violence that we wouldn't see otherwise. Now, as for me, I'm richly blessed. And I think most of you could probably say, you know, I feel blessed. Someone said, well, your knee's really bothering you. My knee is really bothering me. My knee is minor compared to a lot of things that other people have. I find little worry about that because I know people who's got it a lot worse and suffer a lot more. So that doesn't take away from my blessings. I look forward to work. I look forward to seeing people. I look forward to my study time. I enjoy my devotion every morning. It's a good thing for me. My life and ministry I am blessed by. Now, they're not always easy. There's times that it's difficult. And life isn't always what I want it to be. Is anyone's life exactly what you want it to be? Deb wanted to marry someone that was really tall and good looking. She got me. What can I say? She settled for middle of the road and ugly. So what can you say? Sometimes it's just not the way it is. But does that mean that we're not blessed? I can't judge whether I'm blessed or not on my life wants. Sometimes my wants are just not right. My life is blessed. Just the fact that my feet hit the ground this morning, I was very happy when I got up. I was blessed to come and open the doors. The alarm didn't go off whenever I was really happy about that. You want to talk about a panic. We put in this security system. All right, now most of the time it operates very well. You have 60 seconds to push in the code. And at the end of 60 seconds you have policemen. All right, so you just figure it out. Some mornings I come and on the third time I'm thinking, I need help. And I'm probably going to get it real quick. So it was a good day. The alarm didn't go off. But see, that's not always true for everybody else. I'm never without hope. I have Jesus in my life. You're never without hope because you have Jesus in your life. Yet there are so many people in this world that are without hope. I can't help but think that this past week, a 24-year-old young man, somebody had taught him a whole lot about hate and very little about hope. And in turn, we saw 4 young Marines die. I'm troubled by that, just as you are. People that are living without hope, they face difficult situations every day. Are there any of you that haven't had to face difficult situations sometime in the past week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks? Is there any of you that's every decision's had to come really easy? Does anyone else have to look at their checkbook and think, now, I can't pay all of that this time, but I'm going to pay part of it? Does that happen to anyone else? So what did happen to this young man that was so different than what you're going through? He knew no hope. You know Jesus. He didn't. Jesus makes the difference. Today I want to talk about a life with purpose. See, in the time of Jesus, I think we can go back and study history, and you'll see that in the time of Jesus, Israel was a people without hope. I want to give you some ideas of what they may have been dealing with. First of all, God has been silent for 400 years. That's the time between the Old and New Testament, approximately 400 years. There's been a silence on God's part. Now, as God is being silent, that means that there is no prominent or predominant leaders that have come up. There are no prophets that are speaking to them. There's just a time of silence on his part. So you think about no outstanding leaders that have been brought to the forefront. And the people they're drifting farther away from God because they're not hearing about God. Many today think God is being silent. There are many throughout, and you'll read about it, and you can read articles about it or commentators about it. But is God really being silent? I don't believe God's being silent today. I just don't think we like what he's saying, quite truthfully. I think there's a whole world today that doesn't like God speaking and God having something to say to them about what's transpiring. And maybe our priorities are all messed up. Is there anyone else that can read the Scripture and not be convicted by it? If you've read God's Word this week, it's convicted you about something. God's not being silent. But in that time, they believed he was being silent. So the people have started growing into despair. Their religious leaders have become self-serving. If you've even been following the series on the Sunday night about the Bible, you'll see how self-serving they have portrayed Caiaphas and the religious leaders. And that's true of what history is telling us. That it was a time of very self-serving. The temple and the temple guard and the priests that were in charge were out of control. It was all about what can they do to be honored instead of how were they honoring God. And it was a mess. So religion was a very important part of the Jewish life. But the religious leaders, the temple, they were also important to them. But now it's all out of focus, so it's all changed. Have we seen any of that today? Someone was telling me the other day about a pastor who was wanting to buy a jet. Did anyone see that? I read a little bit about it. Some minister, some pastor wanting to buy, I forget how many $million jet it was. You know, we'd have to build a runway for me to land that if we got one here. I don't know whose house we'll tear down. Yeah, so now there was one on the news the other night. Maybe you saw this one. I couldn't help but laugh about it. This woman who was a single parent, very down financially, got a letter from the church that it cost $1,000 to be a member there throughout the year. That you was expected to give so much money and then so much money for holidays and things in this order. If you ever get one of those letters from here, let me know, all right? Because it's not being sent from here. Yeah. Wow, I was amazed. So could we say that religious leaders have become very self-serving today? Well, I see things that on some of our televangelists that are greatly concerning to me, that are talking about some of this same-sex marriage and things in this order and how they were okay with it. I wonder if that's a popularity statement. You ever wonder about that? Anyway, just throwing that out for you, just a thought. The people in Jesus' day were also under Rome oppression. Rome has them greatly oppressed. Now, we don't think too much about that because we've never suffered with that. But the Roman government has taken over virtually the whole world. So here they are in the day of Jesus. There's Roman soldiers in Jerusalem. Now, being in Jerusalem was one thing. It's an occupation force. Occupation. The Roman legion had occupied the Holy Land, what we call the Holy Land today. And that means if you decided to go down to the local festival being held on the local parking lot of the mall, there's going to be troop presence. We don't live like that. But they were oppressed with that. Many places in the world are living like that. So they had that oppression that were going on. Soldiers were constantly visible. They were on the street corners. They were at the outskirts of the temple. The people were greatly familiar with the Roman presence that was there. And it was offensive to them. In fact, it would be because of Caesar that Jerusalem would eventually fall. Because he's wanting to put his image in the temple. His image in the temple. And then 70 AD or so, Jerusalem would fall because of such things. And the people are suffering this oppression from Rome. Now, taxation, well, they had hardly enough to keep their country going. Where did the money go? Back to Rome. Back to Rome. So the people are a people that are virtually without hope. God has been silent. The religious leaders that should be helping guide them through a very difficult time are very self-serving. Rome is oppressing them. Matthew chapter 9, verse 36, Jesus would comment on it. He said when he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Like sheep without a shepherd. So as he looked out at them, he thought, there's no leadership. They had no spiritual leadership. They had no government leadership. All of this was transpiring right before them. The people were suffering. Every morning whenever they would get up, they would be facing days of difficulty and uncertainty. They would have times of depression, being defeated, and worst of all, hopeless. Because there was no sign and end that things were going to change from the Roman oppression or to the self-centered religious leaders. So what is to happen? Well, God is going to send a messenger. And that messenger is going to be one who is clearly focused. He is going to be one that God has set aside for the moment. Matthew chapter 3, verses 1 through 6. In those days, John the Baptist came preaching in the wilderness of Judea and saying, repent, for the kingdom of heaven has come near. This is he who was spoken of through the prophet Isaiah, a voice of one calling in the wilderness. Prepare the way of the Lord, make straight path for him. John's clothes were made of camel hair, and he had leather belt around his waist. His food was locusts and wild honey. People went out to him from Jerusalem and all Judea and the whole region of the Jordan, confessing their sins. They were baptized by him in the Jordan River. A messenger from nowhere, out of the desert of Judea would come this man. No one had heard of him. Now, one of the things different today is, at least as a minister, if there's some up-and-coming young preacher, I hear about him. We hear about how, boy, this young guy is doing great, or what a fantastic message he is able to deliver. I've been hearing about a young preacher. I know his dad so very well back in Illinois, and everyone I've talked to has talked about how great a young preacher he is and how powerful he is. That's really encouraging to a preacher. You like to know that there are more preachers coming along. I think of the generation before me and how powerful they were. And I think of those in my generation. And now to hear the next generation coming on, even in the days of difficulty for the church, young preachers coming on. But no one had heard of this guy coming out of the wilderness. No one knows who they are. See, we have more information than they did then. Let's consider some of what we have. Remember his parents? Zachariah and Elizabeth. Remember the story that we would hear about them? Here they are, they're beyond childbearing age. God has already visited Mary. She's going to hear about her cousin Elizabeth. Elizabeth is going to have a baby. And the Lord said, name him John. But Zechariah was serving at the temple, had been cast by lots, and it was his turn to serve in the temple. And he's gone in to lead the nation in their time of prayer, that once a year situation where he would go in and represent before the Holy of Holies, the priest. And he's in there and an angel speaks to him. The angel said his name was Gabriel. And he said, now here's what's going to transpire. You're going to have a baby. And he's going to be blessed of God. Now we know him to be John. In fact, the angel said his name will be John. And Zechariah, like most preachers, asked too many questions and said, how will I know that this is true? I can almost see the angel going, wrong question. He said, well, you're going to know because God has told me to tell you, but now you're not going to speak for 9 months. See if you got any more dumb questions. You're not going to have anything else to say for a little while. So it all comes down. The baby is born, and mom says his name is John. And people say, well, let's go talk to dad. He probably wants him called Junior. He said, give me something to write with. And he wrote John. And then he started speaking again. Remember all that? All that would transpire. We only hear about it at Christmas. All of that would transpire and all of that would take place. But this baby was born with a purpose. A purpose. God had a purpose for this child, and He is going to fulfill that child. The baby was born clearly defined purpose. What about your children or your grandchildren? Have you helped them to identify purpose? That's one of the things that we try to do, whether it's at camp or whether it's here in our youth program or whatever, is help kids define purpose. But now if you haven't done that with your kids, maybe no one did that with you. Maybe you need to help define clearly the purpose that God has for you. Folks, sometimes we get so confused with this thing of purpose. We think, well, God's purpose for me is happiness. Maybe that's not the only purpose that God has for you. Maybe there's something else that He has in mind for you. Anyway, Zachariah and Elizabeth will watch their baby boy grow up, and then he's going to wander around out there in the wilderness, in the desert. Then he's going to come out of the desert and he's going to start preaching. They sent a messenger, God did. His name was John. Now he had many commendable traits. I want to address a few of those. Matthew chapter 3 verse 4 will tell us this. John's clothes were made of camel's hair. He had a leather belt around his waist. His food was locusts and wild honey. I call that self-denial. Wild honey don't sound too bad, but I've seen those locusts. They look hard to swallow to me. I can't imagine dressing like that. Even in that day, you're going to stand out. Self-denial. This wasn't about him. This was about what God was calling him to do. He didn't have time to worry about the finer things of dress and how he was going to be. Matthew chapter 3 verse 7 will say this. But when he saw many of the Pharisees and Sadducees coming to where he was baptizing, he said to them, "You brood of vipers, who warned you to flee from the coming wrath?" He was courageous, had courage. Courage. He could speak up. I believe that we're seeing courage go by the wayside often today. Here's a preacher that had a lot of courage. He just spoke up and said, "Well, you brood of vipers, who warned you? Who told you to come out here?" Remember I said the religious leaders had become self-serving? And he's saying, "Why are you here?" Now, was it because he didn't want them there? Absolutely not. Many people interpret it that way. What's he wanting? He's wanting them to identify the fact that they need the Lord. We're not here just to be seen. They were there for a purpose. Matthew chapter 3 verses 14 and 15. But John tried to deter him, saying, "I need to be baptized by you." This is when he's speaking to Jesus. "And do you come to me?" Jesus replied, "Let it be so now. It is proper for us to do this to fulfill all righteousness." Then John consented. Obedience. He was obedient to God's will. What a wonderful trait so far. Self-denial, courage, obedience. Obedience to God's will. Jesus said, "Let it be so." Now, I want all of you to take just a moment, and I like these self-examination questions. Are you being obedient to what God wants of you? Are you really trying to do what God wants? Sometimes it's easy to say, "I don't want to do it that way." John said, this shouldn't be. I should be baptized by you. And Jesus said, "Let it be so." And John was obedient to him. I believe sometimes God's put a burden upon some of our hearts and we've been slow to respond. That there's things to be done. There's work that has to happen. There's opportunities that we are missing because we're not always obedient to what He wants. Mark chapter 1 verse 7. And this was His message: "After me comes the one more powerful than I, the straps of whose sandals I am not worthy to stoop down and untie." Humility. John was a humble man. It wasn't about him. Folks, we should never think that church is about us. We should never think it's about the preacher. Whenever we come here, it's all about Jesus. And that's the message I want all of you to hear. It's all about what we can do to promote the kingdom of God. And that's what John is saying. He said, "I'm not worthy to be in His presence. I'm not worthy to tie his shoes or to untie his shoes. I'm not worthy. Well, John certainly was God's man, and we all know that. And these are wonderful traits that we've seen. All of us have various traits in our life that we could identify. Some good and some not so good. So how do you rate on these? Self-denial, courage, obedience, and humility. If each of you were to rate yourself about this, how are you doing with that? Are you courageous with the gospel? Or is it sometimes, I'm ashamed of the gospel? Is it easy to not admit you're a Christian? You ever been in one of those crowds whenever it takes a little courage to say, no, I go to church, I can't do that? You ever been there? Well, you surely have. Sometimes you have to be a little courageous with the world. You ever find that sometimes it's a little self-denial that is needed? I can remember talking to a preacher many years ago who we were at a convention meeting. We sat down and their church was growing in leaps and bounds. And he said, we've just called our staff in, our eldership, our deacons, and we've all sat there and thought, how in the world can we take the next step? How can we make the next move? How can we fulfill that next thing that is needed because we don't have the resources? And one of the men said, well, let's go to the congregation and tell them what we're needing. Another one said, well, maybe we should put it on hold. And finally, one of the elders said, maybe we all should just humble ourselves and go without a pay raise. Now that was elders, deacons, trustees, ministry team. And he said that really got kicked around for quite a while. Then we decided instead of doing that, we'll just go to the congregation and say we're all in this. Oh boy, it was good when it was just the leaders, wasn't it? That we're going to ask everyone for 1 year to go without a raise. Whatever raise you would have gotten, whatever percentage, whatever amount it was, would go to the Lord this year. He said we weren't able to get one staff member, we got 2. Because the people signed up. What about a little self-denial once in a while? That we might be able to expand ministry further than we ever have before. All these are wonderful traits, as I've said. But they weren't even John's best. John's greatest trait, folks, was purpose. Purpose. Matthew chapter 11, verses 10 and 11, words of Jesus. This is the one about whom it is written, I will send my messenger ahead of you, who will prepare your way before you. Truly I tell you, among those born of a woman, there has not risen anyone greater than John the Baptist. Yet whoever is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. His purpose is clearly defined. Clearly defined. Malachi would say in chapter 3, see, I will send my messenger who will prepare the way before me. John come to fulfill that purpose, folks. That was the trait that I want you to see. And that's the trait I'm going to ask you about today. Purpose. Now that may not be your number one trait in life. Maybe your trait is something else, and maybe your greatest trait is still to be mentioned. Matthew chapter 3 verse 3 said, prepare the way for the Lord, make straight his path. Isaiah chapter 40 verse 3 would say, one purpose for everyone that has there is to prepare your heart. He was to prepare the way for the Lord. Purpose. Now let's go to your purpose. God has given you a purpose. That's one of your traits. Everyone here has a trait called purpose. He's given you a purpose. Now what is your purpose? Every one of you have the same purpose today. Don't know that, but you do. Your purpose is to prepare your heart for the way of the Lord, so that God has no obstacles coming into your life. To prepare yourself for Him coming. John was going to prepare for the coming of the Lord. I'm asking you to prepare for Him to come into your heart like He's never come in before. that the purpose that God has given you this very day is to remove those obstacles from your heart that are blocking you from the service that God wants you to do. That you will identify the purpose that He has for you, and that you will apply it to the work that He has before you. That you'll be able to do these very things that He is asking of you. We can't help but make this happen in our life, folks. We have to see that that purpose is going to be imperative. John was to prepare the way for the Lord. Some of you today, and I wish that there were others here that could hear this, you have obstacles in the way of your heart that is keeping God from doing everything He wants to do. You've got obstacles that are stopping you from doing that forgiveness thing that you need to do. You've got obstacles that are there before you that are keeping you from fulfilling your dream as a Christian. You got obstacles that are before you that are blocking the very life source of the Holy Spirit dwelling within you. Now, who can remove that obstacle? You can. You can. Through the very power of Jesus. Remove that obstacle. Let Him fill your heart. Let Him fill your life. Now I want all of you to do a little self-evaluation. Are you enjoying your Christianity as much as you should? Has it become repetitious? Is it just the same old stuff every Sunday, every day, every week? If it is, there's something blocking you. There's something in the way. John's purpose was to prepare the people for the coming of the Lord. Your purpose is to prepare your heart to let Jesus in. Many Christians today will miss the full joys of Christianity because there's something blocking them. There's something they're not willing to let go of. There's a hatred. There's some unhappiness. I started out by saying, life isn't everything I've wanted, but I'm blessed. Sometimes we have to learn that lesson. Some of you may have wanted to be something great or accomplish something wonderful. The greatest accomplishment that you can do in life is to put Jesus in your heart. There is no greater accomplishment. It'll take you farther than anything else you can do. And it's entirely on you. John's purpose was fulfilled. He would preach, and the people would listen. And they would flock out of Jerusalem to hear this guy that is dressed funny, smells funny, and eats funny. And they would come in groves out of Jerusalem to hear him. And he would start telling them about the one that was coming. And he'd start saying, I'm not worthy to untie his shoes. He'd start telling them about how the one that is coming is going to bring them hope like they've never had before. That they're going to see the fulfillment of things that they've only read about. And this was a people that were hopeless. Today, there's a lot of people who are hopeless because their heart is blocked. Some of you believe that life is as good as you're ever going to have it. That's wrong. Life gets better every day with Jesus. Every day with Jesus. Doesn't mean it gets easier. It means it gives me a means to get there. Doesn't mean that I'm going to like everything that's going to come tomorrow. It just means that I have a way of dealing with it. Purpose. Matthew chapter 9 verse 37 would say this. Then he said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Workers are needed. If you want to do your very best for God, clear the way for Him to come into your heart. Remove the obstacles. That's called purpose. Purpose doesn't come easy. Now everyone hear this. You have to decide to do it. You have to decide to do it. Because of your path in life, you've developed many traits, and many of you have such wonderful traits. We have encouragers out there. Those who just kind of pick you up and make you feel good. We have those who just have wonderful singing talents, traits. We have others who have the gift of hospitality. There's so many out there. But the one trait you all have to have is purpose. His many traits, but it was his purpose that stood out. Your life, you need to have purpose. And you need to clearly define it. See, I believe that we can accomplish great things right here, right now, in Latonia. John the Baptist, the Scripture says, was the greatest amongst men. But he wasn't in heaven. Everyone in heaven was greater. His purpose was for here. God's purpose is different in heaven. Now it's your choice. What obstacle's blocking you? What's keeping you from being everything you want to do for God? See, John accomplished great things, and it said there was none greater than him. How many miracles did John do? None. None. Didn't do a single miracle. He just fulfilled what God wanted him to do. Now there was others who did many miracles. Jesus didn't say they were the greatest. He said John the Baptist was the greatest who had ever lived, next to Jesus. Why? He clearly defined his purpose. You want to be the greatest that live? Clearly define your purpose, and God will open those doors for you. So today's trait is purpose. Now it's on you. You have to make that decision. Will you all please stand as we have our invitation? Thank you all very much for being here today. God bless you for that. Remember Don's birthday party this afternoon. All right? He's just short of 100. All right? So, anyway, remember Don's birthday party this afternoon. When you get here, ask him what it was like getting off the ark. So, Virginia, are you listening? I'm not picking on you. So, but anyway, talk to Don, come and enjoy the afternoon and spend a little time with him. He may not remember the ark, but he does remember when Brother Runyon laid the first brick here. So he's been here a long time. All right. So anyway, there's other things there in the bulletin. Please take special note of them. And we want to encourage you with the school supplies and all that's going on with that. Continue to pray for Latonia Christian. Folks, we're living in a tough world. we sure don't need to drop any churches. Continue to pray for the work that is going on and all that is transpiring. Make sure you got Josh in your prayers as he's announced to you what his intentions are. Make sure you're praying for him. It's a very important time for him and his family as well. All right? So let's have a closing prayer. Heavenly Father, we ask that you'll walk with us. Help us, Father, that we'll clearly define what you want us to do, that we'll see that we need to clear some obstacles so that we can be about your business. In Jesus' name, amen.